Hello and welcome to this CNBC Africa special. We're here in Nairobi, Kenya to witness what happens when a company's drive for co-creation, partnership and innovation come together. We're here at the Visa Innovation Studio launch.
When you look at Africa as a continent, we all agree that it's a continent full of opportunities. You know, it starts with the population that we have. I was looking at some of the statistics, and they indicated that by 2030, we would be around 7.9 billion. If you add 30 more years, we would have 2 billion new people in the world. Now, out of the 2 billion people, half would come from sub-Saharan Africa. Half. So that tells you about how vibrant the continent is, and more importantly, how the youth will fuel the opportunities moving forward. We remain a very cash-based economy altogether, despite how vibrant MNOs have been and the fantastic job that they've done to bring access. Banks also have done well at, making credentials available to, consumers. On the acceptance side, we've done very well to triple within a couple of years, the number of merchants that would accept digital payments. But again, when we look at the entire payment flows that are happening today in the region, 90% of it is still happening in cash. When we look at what the technology enables us to do, we were discussing earlier about the contactless technology that allows you to tap and go, that allows smooth everyday spend opportunities to happen. We also looked at, tokenization and how it enables on e-commerce, secure transactions, create choice and control for the user to access, transaction on e-com. And this innovation center today is all about unlocking the opportunities that are mentioned and capitalizing on the technology that allows us today to offer unique solutions to consumers, unique customer experiences to our customers here in sub-Saharan Africa.
We have been in Africa for many, many years. In fact, when Visa first expanded globally, one of our first points of presence was here on the African continent in South Africa. We opened our first office in South Africa in 1992, our office on the African continent, and now today we have over 11 offices. Some of our newest offices have been in Addis Ababa, in Khartoum, Sudan, and in DRC. And we open offices in markets because it is vital that we are there and working with our partners in each of those markets. We still have a lot of work to do. Aida talked about the demographics, and Africa is one of the most dynamic and growing regions. We've talked about the population. We've talked about an economy and a demographic that is young and digital and mobile, and that certainly serves the purposes that we have. We have, over the course of the years, we have about 125 million credentials across Africa. But when you look at that compared, and I won't even talk about the growth Aida talked about that we see coming in the future, but 1.4 billion consumers, we still have a long way to go. We have, 3 years ago, we had about 600,000 merchants across the African continent. There are more than 40 million small and micro businesses out there for us to serve. In the last 3 years, we've tripled that number, but we have to continue to pick up the pace if we are going to approach and engage the whole ecosystem. We've seen tremendous progress during the course of the pandemic. We've seen consumer attitudes change. We've seen e-commerce grow at rapid rates. We've seen contactless technology become real and certainly really take up steam here in Africa. And contactless technology is so important. It is a fundamental infrastructure. 5 years ago, we had a handful of contactless transactions. We're at almost 40% on the African continent. The pace of innovation has picked up. We've seen it. There are new players coming into the ecosystem. There has been, if you looked at about 4 or 5 years ago, there was $400 to $500 million of private equity or venture capital funding invested on the African continent. That number is now 10 times. It is $4 to $5 billion, and that probably underrepresents the amount of investment. So we've got investment. We've got a wave of new fintechs and existing traditional partners and fintechs out there that are working to co-create what we need to do to solve in the ecosystem.
We are the cradle of innovation. And so for me, it's really nice that we have this innovation studio right here in the cradle of innovation. You may want to even say that you are now coming into the hotbed of innovation. So that's okay. Welcome, welcome. Of course, we have a long-standing relationship, Visa and Kenya, and indeed the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. Long-standing relationship. We've been doing all sorts of things together. We want to build our digital infrastructure, our digital systems, our digital financial systems on solid foundations. And a key element of that is obviously cybersecurity. And thank you for working with us in this area and working with the developers in the room and others that are not in the room. Now, a few things I want to say about what we have also been doing in the digital or the digitalization frontier. With the pandemic, this has really pushed all of us. The number of transactions have really moved online, or should we say on the digital space, away from the cash, etc. By the way, I think it's important for us to appreciate that there'll always be cash. So let's not talk about cashless. Let's talk about less cash. That is the space we need to go to, right? But anyway, during COVID, we actually got into this less cash space in a significant way. But even with that significant opportunity, there are also some problems. And I think the problem we saw during the COVID period is the development or the rise of the big techs. So the big techs, and you can name them. I'm not going to name names, but I could. I'm not shy about naming names. And this is something that we globally have had to deal with. Because as you can imagine, the big techs ended up pretty much taking the lion's share of the benefits that were coming out of, let's say, from digitalization. And I think this is something we have been fighting to restore some balance. And I think you've probably read a lot about it. It isn't only here in Kenya. It's not only in sub-Saharan Africa. It's actually a global problem. But that's one of the things that we have seen in terms of need to rebalance our benefits, right? Benefits. Now, in sub-Saharan Africa, there has been also significant benefits to the population. And I think one of the ways of measuring that is through financial inclusion. And I think all of us appreciate that we have actually, using the digital technologies, we've leapfrogged. Kenya was at 26.7% financial inclusion in 2006. So financially included adults. And in 2021, this number had increased to 83.7%, so threefold increase. This is not shabby. I mean, this is a number that, so it's a bit like saying, well, Eliud Kipchoge breaks the 2-hour limit on the marathon, right? I mean, significant. I think all of us will remember that day, right, when it happens. So the point here is that this has been a significant shift, and you can see the benefits from this in all the population that has in Kenya. We recently launched our national payment strategy for 2022 to 2025. And this is something that lays out in, I think, a lot of detail our vision for in the payment space. It is something that I think for all of us, all innovators, you need to sort of make it your own. Understand particularly those parts that are very relevant to you. The vision is very clear and very simple. It is having a secure, fast, efficient, and collaborative payment system that supports financial inclusion and innovations that benefit Kenyans. These are things that resonate with you, I'm sure. When we were walking around and being shown all these, let's say, possibilities, including the matatu and purchasing of things, all this, actually the presenters did make some of these points. They did talk about how this is a secure system, efficient and easy to use, etc. So those are words that relate to our vision. And I would encourage you to go back to the vision, understand the elements of that vision and the elements of the strategy, because really, to our mind, this is the best framework that for the work that you're going to do over the next 3-4 years, not just here in Kenya, but for the benefit of the rest of sub-Saharan Africa.
And it is now time for our panel discussion, where we're going to be discussing how we can harness Africa's spirit of innovation for growth. Let me introduce to you my esteemed panelists, starting with Kennedy Mupita, who is the SC Ventures Lead, Africa and Middle East at Standard Chartered Bank for Kenya. Then we have Sitoyo Lopokoyit, Managing Director at M-Pesa Africa and Acting Chief Financial Services Officer at Safaricom. We are also joined by Nana Araba Aban, Group Executive Consumer Banking at EcoBank, and Otto Williams, Head of Product, Partnerships and Ventures for Central and Eastern Europe, Middle East and Africa at Visa. Now, as the governor just said, what really stuck with me is this notion of continuous innovation. And I'm joined by a panel of innovators. So what I'd like us to start out with is to actually find out a little bit more about what you do in just 30 seconds, and also why does innovation matter to you? Starting with you, Kennedy.
Just briefly, I manage the SC Ventures business unit, leading in Africa and Middle East. So basically, we're looking for new ways of dealing with commerce, industry, and service delivery with a financial mindset and technology background, and see how we can incorporate new developments in these areas into the financial services sector. And we also fund investments in these areas, either as investments or as joint ventures in which we participate and manage the organizations.
Brilliant, thank you. Sitoyo, tell us a little bit about you in 30 seconds, and why does innovation matter to you?
Hi, my name is Sitoyo Lopokoyit. I'm the MD for M-Pesa Africa, and for us it's more about transforming lives. We're a purpose-led organization, and I strongly believe that if the society is successful, we'll be successful. And a lot of the stuff that we do in our ecosystem is to empower what we call the two-sided ecosystem, business and customers, and the innovators around to deliver relevant products and services. So we're in a very exciting space, and there's so much opportunity within the African continent.
Brilliant, thank you. Nana, tell us a little bit more about your role and why does innovation matter to you?
Great. I'm Nana Abang with EcoBank. I look after the consumer banking business across the continent. Now, financial services really are the heart of what everybody does. I need to pay for something. I need to put money away. I need an insurance. I need to plan for my future. I need to make something happen yesterday. How can we, partnering with yourselves, all my colleagues here, how can we actually solve these problems for the consumer? What do you need today to make your tomorrow a reality? And how can we leverage financial services to make that a possibility? So we're all about solving the problems of consumers as relating to financial services.
Brilliant, thank you. And Otto?
Thank you. So I had product and partnerships for our Central Eastern Europe and Middle East region for Visa. And when we think about innovation and why it matters to us, I think for us, being a purpose-driven company, which is really about uplifting everyone everywhere, and when you're in 200 countries, the only way you can actually successfully do that is by being able to understand the needs of each of the markets that you're in, and the needs of the consumers and the needs of the sellers, and innovate around how you bring convenience, how you bring simplicity, how you bring security and resilience to that experience. And so it is critical for us, and I think it's demonstrated in the investments that we're making in the 12th Innovation Center and studio that we have deployed globally. And we will continue to do that because it allows us to tap into the insights and the trends that matter in order for us to be able to continue to deploy convenient, simple, and secure solutions for our consumers and sellers globally.
Now, I really like what you're saying, and it's something that came out in what the governor was saying as well as throughout the whole launch, is this notion of customer-centricity and putting the customer, the end consumer first before we start with the innovation. So, Kennedy, I'd like to find out a little bit more in terms of what you do. How are you doing this? How are you harnessing and identifying the needs and the gaps and the problems to be able to bring innovation forward?
Basically, because of the tools in which the environment we live in now is going very, very well tooled in terms of technology capabilities, digitization of various activities in the life cycle of a product or the life of an individual. We understand that innovation takes place at each of these steps. And therefore, we're very much open to how does each person experiencing a service or a product, whether it's banking or even in the physical world, how can that service be improved using existing technologies? And this ideation can come from any point. And therefore, we're very much open to, we have an open door policy in terms of encouraging internal staff, first of all, to make suggestions as to how they can create how can they make processes more efficient, cheaper, and improve the customer experience. But we're also open to the outside world, and that's why I also run an innovation lab, where we actually open to the public to be able to see what problems are they solving, how are they how are they seeing the delivery of services or supply chains, and how can they improve that experience. And we invest money in first of all, using an agile methodology to see, how can, what proposals do they have for improving that? How do they deploy technology? How do they make use of existing data sources and payment systems like Visa, for instance? And how do they leverage those to deliver a solution for the customer? And we invest in, we build a prototype, we use agile methodology, we build out what the MVP would be, and we fund all of that before we actually go in and see this idea should be scaled. I think I'll stop at that, but also one last point, I'm also trying to see where would we be able to invest money effectively to make these ideas practical and scalable.
And that's an interesting notion here, because what I'm hearing from you is very much looking at innovation being fostered in a certain environment. But now, Sitoyo, we also know that from an M-Pesa perspective, you've been innovating continuously. What I'd like to hear from you is how can we foster innovation within the context of a corporate, and also how can we leverage partnerships?
To look at it from the context of where we've come from. So last month we celebrated 15 years of M-Pesa. And I remember my team telling me we launched it 6 months before the iOS. and even before the word fintech was actually coined. But I think it's just to address something the governor said. It's all about focusing on what problem are you trying to solve. When we launched in 2007 March, it was solving the rural-urban migration and how could people in urban areas send money at home. And that's how it has continued over the years, from being a send money home propositions to a payments proposition to a digital ecosystem now. Today, there's more innovation outside M-Pesa than within the M-Pesa ecosystem. And we've done that by partnering with many of the people in this room in terms of opening up that ecosystem. And to give you an example, we have 42,000 developers on our API platform, which means there are 42,000 people trying to do new things. And for us, that's a big opportunity to look at, say, how do you make it to 100,000? In M-Pesa Africa, we're looking at 300,000 developers on our ecosystem. And for us, it's always looking at that ecosystem and saying, it from a very specific two-sided ecosystem. Yes, there's a lot of innovation around the consumer, but I think the exciting bit about Africa is on the SME side of it. And today we have over 3.7 million businesses that run on the M-Pesa ecosystem in it. And we cannot serve that. My team is only roughly about 100 people, but what they do in terms of opening up and leveraging on partnerships to grow this ecosystem is what makes it a success. But I think I'd just like to pause a little bit and look at it from there was a GSMA the 10th anniversary of the industry report that was launched last month. And, I think there are over 1 billion mobile money users, registered accounts, but less than 25% are active in it. And even in Kenya, which is very successful, mobile money, it's only used 12 days in a month. And they use roughly about 4.5 products. So the target addressable market is significant, and mobile money will continue growing double-digit even in countries like Kenya, because there's that opportunity. And for us, is to open up the ecosystem to enable third parties and partnerships, such as what we're doing with Visa, to grow that. So innovation is innate in us, but it has to be purpose-led. It has to be driven by what the customers want. It must be secure, and it must be scalable. And those are the things that we actually embed in it. And more importantly now coming on is things about data protection. So those are the emerging themes that we need to really be careful on, and especially cybersecurity. For us, our role has changed, not only just about driving innovation, but actually securing the entire ecosystem. And that's a new challenge that we're beginning to see that we need to play to ensure that everyone in the ecosystem is actually able to innovate in a secure and scalable manner.
Absolutely. And I want to come back to that notion of security. But before we go to that, Sunana, you work for EcoBank, which is very much present across the continent, 33 countries. And one thing with partnerships, and when we're looking at this notion of co-creation, and specifically on the continent, is, on the one hand, we have a diverse continent, lots of cultures, lots of countries. We have different languages, Francophone Africa, Anglophone Africa, Lusophone Africa. How do we foster innovation when we have so much diversity in a way that brings tangible impact?
Okay, so I think innovation in itself, at the forefront of our minds, we must be thinking about which problem of a customer today or a consumer today needs solving, as well as how can we anticipate a future need or a future challenge that can be solved. Now, from an organizational perspective, innovation must be nurtured across the organization. You must encourage trial and error. You must encourage sourcing of ideas across the organization. People who interact with customers, people who interact with suppliers across the organization. How do you make them a part of innovation? How do we enable ideation, and then we incubate and try it out? Now, that is from the organization's perspective. For example, from a government perspective, how do we feed an innovative culture in our educational system, where we are encouraging students to start innovating and sharing ideas about how the world can be a better place, Do we create an environment that actually fosters innovation? Do we, as regulators perhaps, create an environment that is enabling to investors? What sort of regulatory framework can be developed to let investors be willing, to try it out? So you can look at it from the context of the organization, you can look at it from the context of the state, you can look at it from the concept of the regulator, all of which are required for vibrant innovation to happen in our individual countries and across borders.
And with this notion, I mean, you've just given us different perspectives of where we could look at innovation. But turning my focus to Otto. Otto, you have a very diverse background. Computer science, computer engineering background, worked within banking, now technology. What I've always wondered is, whose responsibility is it to actually innovate? We've had public sector representation, we've got private sector representation. Is it the startups? Is it the big corporates? Whose job is it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And all of ours, everyone's job to innovate. And I think, the best way to describe this would be to just walk you through what we would consider to be our innovation process. And that's where you would see all stakeholders and the broader ecosystem come together to actually drive that outcome. And so it always starts with discovery. And I think the governor very eloquently, outlined that, mentioned it in many ways. We start with consumer discovery. What are the consumer's needs, pain points, what are their journeys, and where are they going? And so it's the consumer, it's the seller. And so from our perspective, driving commerce and driving that globally. So you've got to go out there, and what we do is actually go out in market with research teams to meet with those sellers, to meet with those consumers, understand their pain points and their journeys and how they actually interact. And we've done some of this with Sitoyo and his team here in Kenya as well, and a number of partners here. We've done such discovery sessions and activities in market. And then we take that to the next step to say, based on what we've discovered, how do we design the optimal seller and consumer journey? And we bring that in using human-centered design thinking, and we actually design a journey that is simple and that is convenient for the seller and the buyer. And that's how we drive that next process. Now, coming into that, again, it's in line and working with various stakeholders. Part of that design has to include the regulatory elements. And this is where the regulator comes in as well. And we found that regulators that have embraced eKYC and digital onboarding allows for us to be able to design a more seamless experience, as opposed to saying you've got to go out and sign a document to be, paper onboarded. And that takes us to the next step, which is the develop step. And that develop step also needs to bring additional stakeholders into that conversation. Fintechs that have technology platforms and that are agile, banks and MNOs who've got, significant consumer base, they've got the skill, they've got the data, and they've got the trust of the consumer. And we bring all of that together and our capabilities. And one such example with a partner here that we actually developed a solution with coming out of the design and discovery process was where they needed to further digitize their merchants. And we, on their mobile device, and we brought Visa tap-to-phone technology to that experience. We brought Visa onboarding for that merchant experience with eKYC. We designed the flows. And we also put in digital credentials so that that merchant could receive funds that they could use to pay suppliers globally, and we've got 70 million of such suppliers. And then we also looked at their payroll ecosystem. They've got a number of employees. How do we distribute credentials to those so that they can disburse funds to those employees, all within that same experience? And lastly, those merchants needed to be able to accept online. And so we brought our CyberSource gateway engine to that with fraud management so they could accept payments online. And we were able to deploy that solution. It's live in market today and gaining great traction. And once you've done that, the very last step, which I just mentioned, is deploy. You have to deploy it in a secure, scalable, and reliable way. Sitoyo mentioned that earlier. And that is the platform that we bring to 200 markets, processing 65,000 transactions per second, making sure that it is reliable, with significant uptime, and that it is scalable in any market that you need to expand this into. And so that's how we run through our process. It's discover, it's design, it's develop, and it's deploy. And we find that that really does drive significant outcomes in markets.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a few times some of the things that Titoyo started talking about in terms of security, in terms of data protection, and especially when we're looking at scaling at such a pace. How do we actually go about developing innovations, bringing innovations to the market in a secure way?
I think first, it has to be built secure by design. So, our tech teams, we've got this DevSec ops. So security is by design from the concept. We don't bring security at the end. It has to be right at the beginning. You need to work with partners on it. We engage with the central banks on it, and with the governance team, for example. They know what I'm going to launch 2 years from now. We engage with them because they see things that we don't see. So the regulators see certain risks, Visa sees certain risks, the industry sees certain risks. So we build all this but it's secure by design, and that's really important. And there's one thing that I think we can all agree is on security, is we don't compete on that. I think this is where we need collaboration and partnerships to roll out new products and services. We do have industry workshops with the banks, with other fintechs, and that just helps secure the entire ecosystem. So then there's, I think, Andrew was speaking to our board yesterday, and what are the things that our board is really concerned about? And the one thing was on cybersecurity, and the sophistication of what's happening globally is something that we need to be aware as an industry. We can innovate, we can design all these really nice products for the consumer, but one breach in either data, on data as well as on cybersecurity can bring the whole house down. And that's why we're putting it, huge investments in our cyber defense systems, working, leveraging global partners such as Visa. We had the Microsoft president also around, and that is what we need to do to secure the entire ecosystem, and then let the innovators, really play around and solve problems. But I think that's the biggest challenge we face with regard to innovation.
And with that in light, because I'm hearing the word investment, and I get the notion that innovating is an expensive activity, that it costs money. But with every investment, we want to make sure that we have a return on investment. So how do we make sure that innovation is profitable? And I'm directing my question to you, Kennedy.
Yeah, actually, well, that's the core of my function, actually. And actually, I alluded to this at the beginning, that there's, in terms of the role of management in innovation, is that, first of all, being able to set aside capital and expenditure to be able to test and try. Because as you know, as you try to innovate, there are various misses, and as you try out projects and as you prototype and build wireframes, all that investment is required to prove the idea. And therefore, there needs to be capital set aside for that. Secondly, there needs to be a reward for innovators. Because sometimes you find that people in an organization have ideas about how to improve and how to achieve the mission of every organization using technology in a new way, but then they're not rewarded for it. And so there'll be needs to be able to, how do you allocate a rewarding system to support the innovators in your ecosystem? And as I said earlier, there are also a lot of fintechs and organizations in the economy that are looking at new ways of doing things, but they do not have the capital. And that's one area where Africa has a shortfall, and probably labs like this will actually help in terms of a lot of ideation in Africa, but limited capital for investment in these sectors. And therefore, and these are the people that are on, as the governor mentioned, you've got to be in situ to innovate for a situation appropriately. But the investment capital is not really available in Africa to support the people who are in situ to foster those innovations. So therefore, it's important for us as organizations, whether Visa or Stanchart or M-Pesa is already here, in fact, shows a good example, but to be able to provide funding to the people, the innovators that are within our environment and are looking at different ways of leveraging technology and services to meet solutions for the people actually in the space. So you're right, there needs to be an allocation of capital, and there needs to be an understanding that the proof of concept phase and the MVP phase, they need capital to try out the idea before you can actually see whether it's scalable. And then my last point on this will be using agile methodology also limits the amount of commitment you can make. Because if you previously, innovation used to be done at the board level, and then you decide this is what we're going to do, and then a lot of money is spent on it, no trial and testing methodology used, and therefore you find that at the end of the day you've spent millions of dollars inventing something that the people do not want. So using a trial and testing methodology where you actually try out a solution, see whether it works, adjust, make room for amendments, make room for people to make mistakes, and don't fire them at the first failure, and see where that is going to go. Therefore, you build the idea and make it scale so the idea becomes investable and is suitable for the market. So that's our approach towards that.
Some very important points, and I really like that you mentioned the notion and the importance to deploy capital, to allocate capital for innovation, and also the importance of, I want to call it consumer feedback, and making sure that we understand what consumers want, what the people want. And that's why I'm directing my attention to you now, Nana. You are in charge of consumer banking. How can corporations, policymakers get feedback from the end user and revert it back into innovative ideas?
Okay, so I think I will first talk about a couple of things that we're doing to bring innovative ideas to the table. So we run an innovation race, which is internal. And it cuts across the entire organization, and it encourages, whether you're in compliance, whether you're in sales, whether you're in marketing, whether you're in HR, across the organization, put forward ideas. And these ideas typically stem from your own experiences, not necessarily as a banker, but as a consumer. How would the world be a better place? And also the feedback you're getting from customers, from suppliers, from other third parties. So that's a good way of actually getting that information in and thinking around, okay, so which of these can we actually start, ideating around and then prototyping, so on and so forth, testing it, so on and so forth. That's the internal part. But I think a much bigger thing is what we call a fintech challenge. We've been running that as an organization for a couple of years, where we actually open up to fintechs around the globe, and we get a couple of hundreds, sometimes a handful of hundreds of interested fintech players, very small, medium-sized, all of whom have ideas that they've come up with based on feedback that they're getting from the environment in which they find themselves to solve real problems in society. So I think that these are ways in which you can actually bring ideas in and look at innovation that is bankable. Indeed, not all innovation is bankable, but sometimes some innovation is required. So how do we then balance out between this is actually going to make a significant impact on the bottom line, and this is actually going to be for the greater good of society? So, there are all these debates that you need to have. But yes, and all this is actually also fed to our regulators as we engage with them. And in some markets, or all our markets actually, we do encourage thought leadership in engaging with the regulator as the players in the field and those that are getting the direct feedback from the consumers, from suppliers, from other third parties. We feed that back to the regulator, which then informs the regulatory framework. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And what I'm hearing from the both of you actually is this notion of actually trying, of going forward, taking steps, maybe sometimes even making mistakes. And I want to direct my next question to you, Otto. So reflecting on Visa's journey of innovation, what have been some of the key lessons and challenges that you have experienced?
Thank you. Quite a bit. And look, timing is also important in innovation. And if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, it is great timing. The demographic is young. They are, highly connected, and we have mobile phone ubiquity. And I think if the governor's vision is achieved where smartphones can actually be $5, even more so. So it is great timing from a regional standpoint. Then there is the aspect of product market fit, which, following the process that I described earlier around discover, design, develop, and deploy, you ensure that you've got the right product market fit. And then you have to take it through a feedback loop. Get out into market. It's okay to fail and try. What that feedback loop allows you to do, that in itself is a discovery process. Because it may not be that product, but that product will lead you to future products and allow you to discover new opportunities. If you think about Visa's journey, when we started 60 years ago, the way when the consumer showed up to a merchant to make a purchase, the merchant picked up the phone to call their bank to authorize the transaction. Does this person have money for this purchase or not? Today, you can tap it at a terminal, and 65,000 of those transactions happen per second. That is the way we've been innovating around the consumer experience, creating convenience and simplicity. I came into Nairobi carrying a bank card from another country, go to a merchant, and that merchant seller will allow me to walk away with hundreds of dollars worth of purchase without knowing me, doesn't know my phone number, does not know my address, has not seen my ID, and just trusting that they'll get money in their bank account and I can walk away with the goods from their stores. That is significant trust, and it's one that we've built up over the last 60 years, and with a lot of innovation going into that. And everyone in this room can do exactly that in any country that you go to without having to scramble to change money and find cash to gain the trust of that merchant as you walk away with goods and services from their stores. And that is innovation. So we've been innovating around that consumer convenience and experience, using our tokenization solutions so they can actually do it on their phones now, using our remittance platform so they no longer have to stand in line to send money and stand in line to receive money. They can receive it digitally on over 5 billion credentials and bank accounts. And we've been innovating from the seller standpoint so that they can accept payments on their mobile devices without needing expensive POS terminals. And so our journey has been, progressing over the last 60 years. But that journey, the innovation journey, also does include infrastructure. Because, if you're going to be in 200 countries, you have to have resilient, scalable, and reliable infrastructure. It can't work today and not work tomorrow. And we have been innovating around cybersecurity, risk, and fraud, making sure that these transactions are secure, that the consumer continues to feel confident, and that the merchant knows that they're not going to lose all of their revenues to fraudulent purchases. And so it's been a lot of innovation around AI and machine learning to ensure that we're making the right risk and fraud decisions on behalf of our banks, our merchants, and consumers who trust the payment experiences that they're having.
And such important points, and specifically when you're talking about how innovation will help consumers, will help merchants, will help basically drive our continent's economies. But beyond consumers and merchants, we also have our citizens. And Ada alluded to it earlier. Our continent, it has a large unbanked population. So how do we then, beyond mobile money, use innovation for financial inclusion? And my question is to you, Sitoyo.
I think that's a great question. When it comes to certain things that we see in the continent, so M-Pesa has been successful. We're in nine countries across our footprint, processing well over $300 billion on a yearly basis, and processing about 61 million transactions a day. Well, I think for us is there are a couple of things that I just want to bring back to areas that we need to look at as a continent. One, yes, financial inclusion is growing well, but there are a lot of financially excluded people. Women is one thing we've not done great as a continent on women empowerment. Governor talked about the device, and Otto just mentioned about device access. If you look at it in the hierarchy in the family, it's actually the man gets it, the son gets it, and the wife gets it last. We need to empower women. We need to develop products and services in the African continent that actually deliver towards women. And that's something that you're going to be seeing a lot more on it. COVID has been the biggest accelerant for digital financial services. Andrew mentioned it. And what we're seeing is e-commerce is growing. And I got some statistics from Olivia the other day. You know, just in Kenya by 2024 will be $2 billion. In the African continent it's $46 billion. How do we get our citizens and businesses to interact globally, either selling their stuff externally or bringing in internally? I think the third bit of it is about the youth. So M-Pesa is 15 years old. My team in M-Pesa is 28 years old. 15 years ago, they were in high school. These are digital natives. There's no novelty about sending money home. Maybe there are people around this room who might see it as a novelty, but it's changed significantly. We saw the video about how the kids are using technology. It's fundamentally changed in it. And we need to start looking at kids from 10 years old. How do you start developing, providing them with financial education, literacy programs, importance of saving, importance of financial health? That is something that we see. And I think that the last bit is we compete within ourselves in this room, for example. We see ourselves as competition. So I build a super app, you build a super app. We build a payment solution, you build a payment solution. It can't happen like that in Africa. And I think we need to start collaborating on our platforms. And for us, as M-Pesa, there's no product called M-Pesa. We're just a brand, and it's a massive ecosystem, digital ecosystem. We have 3.6 million businesses running on M-Pesa. We have government solutions. We have the stock exchange. We have, large corporates like Coca-Cola, Diageo. All that is happening on the ecosystem. It is an ecosystem that's open. We are providing our AML platform, cybersecurity, to the industry. We're looking at our payment platforms and the APIs and opening up the developer community. We've built this two-sided ecosystem with the super apps that are there. When we talk about a $5 smartphone, it'll probably have 2 or 3 apps that it can have, and then the capacity of the phone is full. Today, even the $40 smartphone can only hold about 7 to 8 apps. They're going to delete. If we all in this room roll out apps, which we are doing because it's the nice thing to do, no one is. We're going to spend $1,000 in trying to get somebody to download it. Use the ecosystem that we have. In Kenya, we have 30 million customers. We have this super app. Come and publish it there. Instantly, you have 30 million customers. Fintechs are doing. And surprisingly, the government is actually doing it in Kenya. They are more innovative than most of the fintechs in the continent. We need to start looking at opening up our ecosystem, partnering in it. You want a payment ecosystem, you want a lending platform, you want a credit scoring platform. Come, it's there, it's been built. We have Eric and NCB here. They will open it up, but everyone wants to build and replicate, and it is an expensive exercise. For the African continent, we need to work more collaboratively to be able to address the challenges. If we don't, it's all going to be a little bit about talk and spending a lot of money, what Kennedy said, in terms of everyone is building their own thing. And we need to build and we need to work in a collaborative way to actually make the continent rise. And I think Visa have shown that this is the continent that's rising, not Asia, not Europe. And I think the future of what the world will see with regard to digital financial services is in Africa.
Absolutely. 100%, no doubt about it. And you've actually, it's almost like you had my notes, you've actually taken me to my closing points. And I want to ask this question to all of you. We have a large youth population on the continent. How can we ensure that we induce a spirit of innovation in our youth? And I'm going to start with you, Kennedy.
Yeah, one of the key issues I think we need to point out that innovation should not be an objective, unfortunately. And I'd love to say that. And technology is not the objective. We should be mission focused. And as the governor mentioned, in terms of what's the mission of every organization, the youth organization, the female empowerment organization, whatever, the health systems and so forth. What is their mission? Even as public entities, what are their mission? And over time, new tools have come into the market, and how then do we use these tools to achieve our mission? And as long as we stay mission-focused and then use technology as a tool to achieve our mission, we'll indirectly become innovative. And therefore, we will be talking to young people, not exactly about, are you innovating, but, what kind of business can you do? How can you do it well? If they're in school, what books do you have access to? How can we cheapen the cost of books to you? Can we use an iPad, for instance? Can we pay school fees on an online platform? Can we put an online platform on M-Pesa that addresses school fees, Or can we do insurance through M-Pesa, through Visa? And so we see a collaborative, a multi-sided collaborative platform that enables people to achieve their objectives in a faster, efficient, secure way. And indeed, we should look at things like risk and control, regulatory, as part of the innovation framework, and not as an impediment to innovation. Because once we infuse all those capabilities into an innovation platform, then we'll be able to meet the mission of people. Because what do people want to do? They want to live well. They want to buy food. They want to pay for all their services. And that's what we should be focused on. And then we look at the innovation and technology as a tool to achieve that. And once we do that, I think we'll be able to be on the right track to actually innovating and not innovating for innovation's sake.
Brilliant. Thank you. From your perspective, how can we harness a spirit of innovation in our youth? In just a few sentences.
First, the youth are very innovative. Whether the guy sees the WRC car and the rally car, they created themselves. A kid sees, something on the internet, they can create, a Fortnite game. But also in the rural areas, they can create their own. I think it's just about providing them with the tools and enabling them to actually just explore. I think that's why we feel it's important that we invest from the education processes, from the tools that we have to enable kids just grow, big kids, explore. And I think that's how I see it.
Explore, keyword. Thank you. Nana, from your perspective?
I think I'll take it from the curriculum architect's standpoint. How do we develop curricula that make our children curious? How do we develop curricula that get our children to try out different things and to express those innovative ideas? And to what one of my colleagues said, you don't set innovation as the objective, but create an environment which actually lets these children be innovative, to share their ideas, to try and encourage failure. So I think I'll really take it from that perspective, so you can grow a society that is innovative by instinct.
Brilliant, thank you. And Otto?
I would actually agree with all my colleagues on the points that they've made here. I think it is a problem-solving mindset. We have to absolutely encourage a problem-solving mindset. If you have a challenge, try and solve it. Think about solving it. And having worked in Silicon Valley and seen so many entrepreneurs and a lot of people who have built innovative solutions, they actually started out trying to solve a personal problem that they had, or that family had, or that people around them had, and then went out and tried to find solutions to it. Hacks, right? They call it. And so it is that problem-solving mindset, but it's also encouraging trial and error. It's okay to fail. It's okay not to get it right, and to try again, to iterate on it. And that's exactly, again, bringing an example of where I've seen this happen. That's what is encouraged. It's trial and error. And in instances where those entrepreneurs have failed, they actually don't call them failed entrepreneurs. They call them serial entrepreneurs. And that is what we should encourage with our youths. And I think lastly is just remove barriers. Remove barriers. And I think it's some of the stuff that we're doing around exposing APIs on Visa Developer Platform, so youths that are want to solve problems can have access to technology capabilities and APIs to actually build those solutions. And we've seen many youths do that across sub-Saharan Africa, build some very innovative seller and consumer solutions. And regulators also easing entry as well, whether it's enabling digital KYC so that those solutions can be easily adopted, and embracing standards. Because what we've also found is that with youth who actually venture to problem solve, have access to APIs that many other global providers have exposed, and they've built an innovative solution, they want to take it to other markets. But where a regulator in another market does not embrace standards, they can't. No one really wants to build from scratch in another country, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. We've got so many countries. So embracing standards really does drive that spirit of innovation and growth and expansion that our youth really strive for. And I think, those are some of the ingredients that I think would really spur and drive innovation across the region for us.
Thank you. And that brings us to the close of our panel discussion. What I'm getting from this is harnessing a spirit of innovation takes a purpose mindset. It takes a desire to explore and opening exploration. It takes curiosity. It takes a problem-solving mindset, allowing trial and error to take place. And lastly, it's about removing barriers. So thank you very much to my panelists. I will now welcome Corinne Mbiakecha, the Vice President and General Manager, East Africa for Visa.
It's extremely important that we come together. We think. Why? Because we have that experience. Who doesn't know Alaba in Nigeria? Who doesn't know East Leaks in Kenya, right? Who doesn't know Mokolo in Yaoundé? Who doesn't know Sandaga in Senegal? All those markets where we've seen our uncle, our aunties selling fabrics, having all those regional traders landing. I'm talking about just the African or the regional cross-border that we can focus on. And this is really what we try to put here in the Innovation Center. And when I see all of you, every single person that has done a tour has been excited. We try to create some areas that will talk to each of us, that will talk to our culture. You have the first zone at the entrance with the representation of the Kilimanjaro, all the tourists that are landing in Eastern Africa just for safari and tourism. You have the representation of the market that I've just described here. But we have to solve for the present, but have in mindset that our brain can enable us to compete globally. So we cannot solve for the present without having a strong vision of the future. And this is also what we've tried to build here in the innovation. So I can only say to all of you, thank you. Thank you for your time. We have hard work. Visa made it possible. It is here in Nairobi for Sub-Saharan Africa. We're not the 40th innovation studio, but the 12th locations. Visa globally. We have to be proud of it. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Aida.